It's Tuesday. It's rugby rundown time, and welcome back to Yonder Koning. I was very excited, and I am very excited to hear what you think of Rassie's new team, but we'll get to that just now. Later on in this video, we'll be talking about the latest in the ticketing pricing. I don't want to call it a scandal, because it's not a scandal, but developing saga, let's call it that. We'll look at the baby box a little bit, and then obviously doping. But let's talk about the Springbok side announced yesterday. Jan, what did you think?
Morning, India. Good day to all the viewers. Yeah, I think Rassie is very clever. I mean, you will remember before the first game, before the England game, we spoke about this, and I said to you, Rassie said to me in an interview, it was a general media interview, but I asked him a question, and he said he's going to continue to rotate right through the season. You know, he might stick with the team for the greatest rivalry series because that's the big goal this year. But these three matches and the last three matches, he's going to continue to rotate. So, true to form, Rassie is rotating, you know, 4 rookies. But I think, again, if you look at the team, you know, people say, oh, he's making a lot of changes again. Just look at the team. So we're bringing Jaco Williams in on the wing. So what has Jaco Williams got either side of him? Aphelele Fassi and Jesse Kriel, you know, or, you know, and he's got Damian de Allende, but Damian de Allende I'll get to now. So he's got old heads, you know. Jesse Kriel will make sure that kid doesn't get too nervous, you know, and that's what you need. You know, you need an old hand that takes the young buck under his wing. And we go to fly half. You've got Paul. Apologies, Vusi Moyo. Sorry, apologies for my pronunciation, Vusi. And again, you know, a rookie, young guy. What does Rassie do? He's got Kobus Reinig on his inside as scrum half to guide him and take the pressure off him, because we know Kobus can do that. And on his outside, he's got Damian de Allende. You know, so he's got 2 old heads, double World Cup winners, guys who can actually guide him through the system. So Rassie is bringing these guys in a test match, in a proper test match. You know, we all know that the Springboks are expected to win well against Wales because Wales is not doing very well. But still, you know, this is a test match, so the perfect time to introduce it.
So I wanted to ask you something. Are you sure it's Damian de Allende? It's not maybe Damian Willemse, because there seems to be general confusion. I know it's Damian de Allende. I'm just kidding, but I mean, nobody, even on the team sheet on Saturday, they said Damian de Allende instead of Damian Willemse. I mean, does SA Rugby know who plays for them?
I think it's the broadcaster that seems to be having problems. So I would take that.
No, it was SA Rugby's team sheet that they sent out to us just before the game started, signed by Charles Wessels. It said Damian de Allende. Yeah.
Okay.
So I said Damian Willemse. Yeah, Damian de Allende. Sorry. Yeah.
Maybe they take their cue from the broadcaster, or the broadcaster takes their cue from SA Rugby.
Yeah.
And there's confusion. Maybe that's what caught Scotland unawares. They were waiting for the Allende and Willemse rocked up.
Yeah, that's probably why Jesse missed so many tackles, because he thought it was Damian de Allende, his old partner in crime, and it was Damian Willemse. So suddenly things changed a little bit. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, that's brilliant. No, I agree.
Let's then move to the forwards. And the thing that stands out for me is Paul de Villiers, once again, starting the match, you know, this time with a proper, let's call it the proper other 2 loose trio members around him. Pieter-Steph du Toit, captain again, and Jasper Wiese. What does it tell you about the number 1, the trio combination, number 2 of Siya's, you know, about Siya's future, and thirdly about Paul de Villiers specifically? Why is he being entrusted with so much? Because you know, you talk about rotation, but he's one of the names that keeps popping up week after week.
I think for me the interesting thing about Paul de Villiers is there was a lot of hype about him, and at the Stormers he was he really won some crucial breakdowns, and he reminds me a lot about Heinrich Brousseau, a really nuggety, grafting person with a high work rate and lots of energy. Now, Heinrich also burst onto the scene like this, and for some other reason, the Springboks didn't like the coaches at the time, didn't always fancy him. But I think Rassie has made it clear that he's looking for somebody different in Siya's place. Is Siya going to be back? I think against the All Blacks, if Siya's fit, Siya will start. He's our captain. If Siya is not 100%, I have absolutely no problem. And I think Rassie is making it clear that there's a change in the pecking order. That number 6 jersey is there for the taking. And I think de Villiers is definitely taking his chances, grabbing it with both hands, as they say. Yeah, so, I mean, it's massive. I think he's a bright rising star in the green and gold.
Well, a couple of questions around him. Now, you said he's got a lot of energy, and the one thing that he does have, just as a matter of his interest, is a very low center of gravity. My friend Paul Avenant was at Loftus, and he said it was incredible how low he actually gets to the ground while still being legal. And that doesn't fall out of the sky. That's quite a special. It's not a skill or a talent. It's just a physical attribute that he's got that he's using to the best of his ability. So yeah, and then in terms of Kwagga Smith maybe, and then Marco van Staden, I thought he might be the crown prince on the sixth position, but it doesn't seem. It seems like Paul de Villiers has leapfrogged him.
Yeah, I think so. Let's do Kwagga and Marco together. They're both utility players. So Kwagga can play any position. So he's the ideal player to bring off the bench. I know that some people don't like that and think Kwagga must start. I think certain players are just better at coming off the bench because they bring something different. So Kwagga is one of those guys. If your number 8 is suddenly tired, you can play him there. If your number 7 is suddenly tired, Peter gets he's physical enough, maybe some of the bigger boys can bowl him over in a tackle, but he's proven, his tackle success rate is pretty close to 90%. So he's physical enough. And the same with Marco. He can play hooker. He's always a backup. He's that extra option at hooker. He can play loose forward. So I think he's also destined for a long-term bench, much like Kwagga in 2 World Cups. Come off the bench and make an impact. And I think Marco's the same. So to me, that is yes, you're looking for a starter, a regular starter. I see Kwagga and Marco as regular bench players.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Marco is not called Eskom for nothing. Defensively, you're going to see those gaping holes, kind of a thing that we saw this weekend against Scotland. Maybe not the direct comparison, but still. That was a bit of a shocker, how easily Scotland ran through the pillar and post, mostly forwards, by the way. It wasn't Andre Pollard missing those tackles mostly. It was the forwards being disconnected. But story for another day. Let's talk about the locks, the big lock crisis we started this Nations Championship with, even before the Barbarians. 8 injuries. You mentioned them names last time. But yet, week after week, we seem to be able to find proper locks that other nations wouldn't mind signing. And now Ruben van Heerden at last making his Springbok debut. And my question is this going to be a one-trick pony, just sort of getting his chance, getting a run out, and then off to France and never to be heard from again? Or do you think there's maybe a longer-term future for him?
I think he's a great backup to have. When all our locks are fit, he would be probably in the 3rd tier of lock replacement. But at the moment, he's in the 1st tier. He's a starting lock. And I think it's a deserved starting position. I think he's another one of those crafty. We don't have a dynamic lock. We don't have a Ruan there, or we don't have an RG offload king. So we've got 2 really good crafters, heavy, strong ball carriers. So poor Wales is going to know about it. You're not going to just run through there. If they somewhere on the pillars or whatever, you go find another place to try and run through. So have we considered some dynamism? Yes, certainly. I mean, we got Carlos Sardi there as well. Carlos quite has shown that he is a bit mobile, but probably not as mobile as you would like to be. So, and Gerard Steenekamp as well. So that's why players like Paul de Villiers and Jasper and Peter Steff is going to be the guys out wider with a bit more pace and quicker to the breakdown, because our tight 5 is very rigid. It's probably the best compliment you can pay them, is they're very rigid, but trustworthy, but rigid.
Maybe a bit cumbersome. Maybe that's the word we're looking for. Not as agile as we would like them to be. Yeah.
I agree. Cumbersome is, but cumbersome in a good way, not in a negative way. They're not plodders.
No.
I work rate, but they not as dynamic as some of our other locks are.
Okay, Jan, now you've been a rugby journalist for 40 years or something, many years. Tell me about that Cobus Wiese lift and then running in the air and then basically being thrown past the defenders, and obviously not intentionally. I'm not saying that. Many people now don't understand the rules, and I don't understand the rule exactly either. Is it illegal? Is it was it, you can't put the guy down on his head, because you have to keep him up, and then it's going to be a matter of balance to get him where he needs to be. And the fact that get past a couple of defenders, maybe that's an added bonus. But how does that work? Do you know?
You're not supposed to carry him. So long and short of it, you're not supposed to carry him. Did the referee allow it? Yes, we got away with it. Maybe it was momentum. It's difficult to say. I mean, we're watching on TV, and I haven't had a chance to speak to the referee, and the referee hasn't spoken about it. So somebody would have asked the referee, is that legal? Because I know that the Scots and a few of the UK journos are having a nappy rash about it. Because there was also one in I think the Baby Bok game where the same thing happened, except that in the Baby Bok game, the guy didn't run with him. In the Springbok game, he did carry him for about 3 or 4 meters, and that gave him the momentum. Once he got put down on the ground, he was in full flight already. So that makes it very difficult. So the short answer to that, it's not legal. You must lift him and bring him down safely. That's your responsibility as a lifter, to bring your own player down safely. But you can't run with him. It's the same as you can't carry a guy in a lineup. So the jumper's got to come down to the ground before the maul starts. So the opposition can't push you first before your jumper's feet touches the ground. And the same with a lifter in a restart or wherever you lift somebody. He's first got to come down to the ground, and then you can start supporting him, pushing him forward. So yeah, I think we escaped one there. We got away with one there.
Yeah, we were kidding about it because the Boks are now playing an aerial game, with the contestable kicks and everything else, and everybody's jumping up. And we thought maybe Rassie invented another type of aerial game. The guy is above your head. You can't tackle him. I'm just kidding, people. Please don't slaughter me or don't. I'm just joking. Anyway, let's talk about the bench. Andre Venter, I think it's his second test. And then obviously Herschel Jantjies, his first test since 2023. He also went off to France and then made a miraculous comeback. I'm also wondering, is he also one of those given another chance, never to be heard from again? Because he was sort of kind of plucked out of obscurity to a degree, coming from France again. Any long-term future for him there?
Rassie, again, that's Rassie's depth, So we've got Krappies is injured. We know that Faf is at Cheetah's knees around, but Faf is not in Rassie's main frame at the moment. So I think this is Rassie having another look at Herschel and, just seeing what he's still got. You can watch video clips and stuff, and Rassie will, and he'll get some stats from the French club, as they do. They do that. They ask the clubs about their stats. So, yeah, I think it's Rassie building depth and making sure that Rassie likes taking 4 scrum halves on any tour. So he likes to have 4 scrum halves in his wider squad. So I think with a couple of injuries, he's just making sure that he's got enough depth if he wants to go with 4 scrum halves, he's got 4 scrum halves.
I want to go back to Vusi Moyo, who plays for the Sharks, but not really the starting fly-off for that matter. I'm not sure whether there was injuries or anything. Now Rassie picks him for the Springboks, not just the under 20 Springboks, but the proper Springboks. The real deal. What does it tell the Sharks? Does it send a message to the Sharks? We know what happened to Sasha. And he started picking him at 10. He started playing at 10 for the Stormers more often than he did fly off or centre or whatever. What does it say about Vusi Moyo's future at the Sharks, do you think?
I think the coach will get the message. Maybe Rassie at some stage will or have already whispered in the Sharks, and JP and said to him, listen, this is our next, So remember this picture, and I think we've spoken about this ad nauseum. We must see the bigger picture. Rassie is busy building not just for next year, but for 2031. He's already that's where these youngsters come in. When Andre Pollard eventually steps away, who knows, maybe after the next World Cup, after next year. We've already seen Willie. So he's starting to look for these guys. Vusi can play fullback. We know we got Quinn Horn there. Rassie is giving Quinn Horn. And Quinn Horn is that utility back. So you go to a 6-2 bench, Quinn Horn can play fly-off and fullback. You can play in the wing if you have to. So, and that's if you look at the bigger picture, you see all these little selections. And instead of looking at the selection in isolation, look at the bigger picture. What's going to happen after next year's World Cup? There's your answer. Rassie is busy grooming this youngster, whether it's for fullback or fly-off, or with whatever position. He's busy grooming him, giving him opportunities to get a feel for the Springboks, get a feel for Test rugby. And when the youngster starts playing regularly, he won't be wide-eyed or like a deer in headlights situation.
I often wonder how much communication there is between the Springboks and the provincial teams or the franchises. To say, listen, I've got a plan for Vusi at Springbok level for this, and I want you, if you can. But obviously there are demands at the union or franchise level that might not necessarily lend itself to that. They can't always pick him at 10, for example, because they need somebody else at flyer or fullback, for argument's sake. I'm just saying that's an interesting conundrum. Okay, anyway, let's ask you this. With this team, what does it tell you? You said the tight five might be a bit cumbersome, slower than normal, a bit more physical maybe. Very dangerous backline though. That Jaco Williams you just mentioned is fast. One of those, one of those players. When you heard his name the first time for the Sharks, you knew this guy's going to be a Springbok kind of a thing. And that's a very dangerous thing to say, but we've been proven correct with that. What do you think? How is this South African Springbok team going to play against Wales on Saturday? What does it tell you?
I think like this past weekend against Scotland, there will be periods of disconnect because these guys haven't, as a combination, haven't played. They've been training. Let's make no bones about this. These teams knew before the start of the season which players are going to play in which match. So they would have had time to train together as a combination, but they wouldn't have played together. So there will be periods because these players don't know each other that well. Okay, Jaco and again, I want to go back to what I said in the beginning. Jaco Williams will have Apalele Fassi. They know each other because they've been at the Sharks. So that will help him ease into it. Jesse Kriel's an old hand. He knows how to bring youngsters around, and he's been good at that. And he's a senior and he's a leader in the team. And the same if you go to Vusi Moyo, you will also have
Kobus Reinach.
Kobus. I know Kobus was probably at the Sharks before. Vusi was out of nappies, but he's a player that understands that culture. So you will understand what type of player Vusi is and what culture he comes from. So he will know how to guide him into the Springbok or ease him into the Springbok fold and the Bok culture per se.
All right. I wanted to ask you one more question about this rotation thing. Jacques Nienaber did this in 2022 against Wales, and that second team made, I think, 12 or something, or 15, I don't know, many changes. More than this even. And it sort of backfired. They lost. They just lost still, but they lost. The first loss against Wales at home ever. What's the difference between that rotation and what it's now evolved into the way Rassie is now doing it, do you think?
Just remember, when we in 2022, we hadn't had a whole build-up because we came out of COVID. Then it was the Isolation Lions series where you can only have so many players, and half of the team at one stage was in isolation in another city. And it was a very strange time. So Rassie didn't have the luxury of 3 or 4 weeks before the season start with players together and players knowing when they're going to play and training together. You're talking about a 46-man squad that's been training together. 3 teams, proper teams, has been training together all the time. So 3-4 years ago, Rassie didn't have this luxury. So I think that's the big difference. This is not something he decided last week to do. It's something he's been planning since last year.
Now, for me, the biggest difference is what you said right from the start, is they put in the young players, but they surround them with old heads. So they're not 15 young players thrown into the deep end. You've got a couple of them seeded throughout the team, but there are young heads, old heads around them, cooler heads that will guide them through it. And that's actually, for me, the biggest difference. I think that they learned the lesson that you can make the changes, but you have to be strategic about how you make them. And I think this is what I'm seeing. Just quickly about Wales traveling back from Argentina. They lost, but I mean, they seem to be on a bit of an upward trend here. Not maybe, shooting the lights out, but definitely not maybe the walkover you would have expected. I mean, after the first round of the Nations Championship, they were on top of the Northern Hemisphere log because they beat Fiji, who would have thought? And all the other teams basically lost, like England lost against South Africa. What are you expecting from this Wales team, just in general?
I think they are, in my view, and it's just my personal view, I think they're on the same level as England, maybe just below, but there or thereabouts. So I still expect the Springboks to win, but they will give some resistance, at least in the first half. So I think, much like it was this past weekend in the first round, I think halftime it'll be still close. Last 20 minutes, the game will open up, and we will, especially with the backline and what's coming off the bench. I mean, if you look at Herschel Jantjies, we know he's quick. Manie Libbok coming off the bench and Damian Willemse coming off the bench. It's going to be a mad rush in that last 20. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing those guys come back after the groundwork has been laid. And as we say, the slow poison of that massive tight five.
Lastly on this, I want to talk about Pieter-Steph du Toit playing week after week. I know they're building up to his 100th test, which then supposedly be somewhere in the greatest rivalry, I suppose. But isn't it a bit risky? He's one of our key players. If he gets injured now, and he is a little bit injury prone, he's been a little bit injury prone, he's been out of the majority of the season as well. Aren't they taking a bit of a chance? Or is this just a way to get him match fit again? And on that subject, why not just give Ben Jason Dixon a run at 7? And Cameron Hanekom, for example, another try. He got one start against England. He didn't maybe shoot the lights out because he was out of position, short notice, and the likes. I would have liked, for example, to see him being given another chance. And I'm sure I'm going to, people are howling that, no, he'll get another chance against Argentina or whatever the case might be. I'm just wondering about this specific team against an opposition that's maybe not as tight or tough as Argentina would be away.
I think this, to me, again, Pieter-Steph playing all the time is Rassie's bigger picture. Because he's making changes all the time, he needs somebody that's stable there. And he needs some stability and a strong leader. So I think that's what it is having a strong leader and a respected player in that pack that can lead those forwards when there's so many changes from week to week. Malcolm Marx is the other stability that starts every week. So I think
Jesse.
And Jesse, yeah. Jesse's in the back line. Jesse will guide the backs. But if we're looking at the forwards in specific, there's lots of changes around them. But those guys are respected players, leaders in the box setup, and they can guide the youngsters. When they stand under the poles like they did against Scotland, you can see who's talking, you can see who's bringing them in, and who leads by example. So I think it's more allowing Rassie to make the changes and have some stability.
Yeah, if I look at the forwards there, clearly Pieter-Steph is by far the most experienced one. I suppose the second one most experienced will be Malcolm Marx, but he's not really known for being outspoken. He's not going to go and gee up the troops under the poles there. I was wondering maybe why Jesse wasn't made captain again. He's been captain before, but we also know Rassie doesn't like the captain to be too far away from the forwards and too far away from the referee. But yeah, that's it. Okay, let's move on quickly. Last Wednesday, I was in Cape Town. You and I were having a coffee, and as we were talking, you got a message to say that a junior Springbok was tested positive for, let's call it, doping. So tell me about that. Your reaction, firstly, and is this now more and more evidence of something going on, especially in junior rugby, schools rugby even?
There is a perception, and we can't argue that. There's a perception that doping is rife in South Africa. Unfortunately, there are enough cases. I mean, there's 2 cases. There's another schoolboy as well. So there are cases of doping, of players being found guilty. Is it rife? Yeah, it's a perception, but I'm not sure it's that rife. So my feeling in general is one of caution. The kid asked for his B sample to be tested. We have no idea because of that. What happened, the type of substance that was found, although it's supposedly a steroid type substance. So there's not much information coming out, and they have to be careful about what they put out in the public domain, because there's guys challenging the
guilty till proven innocent. Yeah,
correct.
That's not it. No, innocent till proven guilty. Sorry, other way around.
It depends on which part of the country.
Exactly. That was a Freudian slip there, I think. Yeah. Anyway.
I think I'm cautious, but you can't argue with the guys who say that doping is rife in South Africa. Because that is a perception, because there's so many cases, so many guilty cases. I mean, you can just go. Let's say it's since 2018. Let's more or less 2018. I mean, Elton Jantjies, Slabakanye, there's, so we can go through this kid, and there's a school kid.
Apiwe Dejanti, you name
the Dejanti, there's another one, Apiwe Dejanti was also from that period. I was looking for his name, apologies, thanks for reminding me. Suddenly you got 5 cases of high-profile players. So can we argue against guys who says doping is rife? No, we can't. I still will err on the side of caution. I think, given the number of tests that are being done, I think they said we test on average about 5 players a month or 5 players a game or something, but it's across the whole broader spectrum. So you're talking about tournaments across the country. So they're also talking about the Craven Week and stuff like that. So you're talking of hundreds of tests and over a period of almost 8 years. Yeah, it's 8 years now. So almost a decade, we've had 5 high-profile cases. Is that rife? Maybe our testing is just better than the rest of the world. Maybe we should ask that question if
Well,
we
our
want to be.
test, that's the thing, Jan. We don't have testing. We send it overseas. We don't even have our own laboratory anymore. So yeah, I can't remember. I know there are more names, and I just can't, put my head or get my head around it. I can't remember those names. The point I'm asking is, do we do enough tests? You can only catch someone out if you do enough tests, and there's a perception that it's being swept under the carpet. That's the overseas. If you talk about to any Frenchman, for example, who's going to send you a picture of an injection, that's his standard emoji answer. To Springboks winning with the World Cup, for example. That's just a perception, and the question is, I suppose that we have maybe I should dig a little bit deeper and talk about this in more depth. So let me just move on quickly,
Yeah.
because I want to talk about the junior Springboks last night. Number one, 2 red cards in that game. Firstly, the England player, I don't know what he was thinking. Firstly, and then that's the very same player who got knocked in the head got a red card himself. And it's now, it turned into a 20-minute red card. But the point is, he might miss the final. What did you see in that game? Because the first half didn't go all the way of the Springboks, and then second half they just pulled the weight. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So England in that first 20 minutes, half an hour, they were brutal. And the Baby Box wanted to get into their running game, and they allowed themselves to be distracted. They got bullied a bit, and then once the red card came, suddenly it gave the Baby Box that lift, that belief that they can go ahead with this and they can outplay their running game. So it was indeed, once they got into running game, and at that stage England were down to 14 men, so it was 15 against 14 before we got the Baby Box got their red card. And outside, our pace outside, our game taking it wide. And that also tired the Welsh forwards. They scored tries late on, but you could see when the game was gone, the Baby Box eased off, and they allowed them in for a couple of tries, which distorted the scoreline, because the Baby Box are far better than this England team, who still rely on brute force. And there's something wrong in English rugby, because if their pack doesn't dominate completely, if they don't bully you, they've got nothing else. Their attack didn't seem to really bother us that much. It's their forwards that created the gaps. Guys running into gaps, or guys running into defensive lines, bending the defensive line, and then causing gaps elsewhere. So I just think that I haven't seen much of the French team so I'm not sure if they've got a pack of forwards that can dominate us like England can. And then our backs are in the game, so we've got a very good chance. It's going to be a very exciting final. But I think this Baby Box team is very, if you think of the amount of talent that's coming through, you're looking at these players, the Baby Box fly was sitting with the Springboks, the Baby Box captain injured now, but he's sitting with the Springboks, So you think of the sheer amount of talent that's coming through, and you look at the centers, you're looking at some of the props. Those are still children, under 20. They're 19. Some of them had just turned 20. So you're looking at children that's 5 years from now is going to, when we get to the 2031 World Cup, some of these guys could be in the Springbok team.
Yeah, no, it's exciting times. I just wanted to ask you this: if it wasn't for that red card of England, and they were basically dominating us, would it have made a difference to the game? Would they have continued to dominate it and maybe, pulled away? Or was it just a matter of time until they got, like you just mentioned, got tired, and then from all the, Springboks running kind of game?
I saw something that I thought was happening. The Baby Box waiting for that one moment. They were trying to create, and they got a bit nervous. So I think by halftime, and you could see the difference when they came out at the halftime. They were so focused at first 15, 20 minutes after halftime, before they let their concentration slip again. They were so focused that England had no clue what was going on. And you needed to, all they had was that one try, because it was 2012, and all they needed was that one try to give them that belief, and they did that, and then suddenly the dam wall burst. So we could have, and I'm just saying, we just needed that one try. We could have had it even with them of 15 on the field, and it was a different ball game. And then this team, and when this Baby Bok team believes and they play according to that structure, which we saw the best time was that first 15 minutes after halftime. That period showed me what the true value or the quality of this Baby Bok team is, and how good they can be. So are they up and down? Are they maybe they're lacking Riley's leadership, calmness? But I think this team, it would still have. I think we would still have won it. We might not have won as easy, because 21 points in a matter of 8 minutes. I think, if I'm correct, that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. And again, I mean, England did score a couple of late tries, but at that stage the game was gone, and the Baby Boks were just in retainment mode. You could clearly see the. They were in cruise control, and there were a number of changes. And then and also we were down to 14, so we're back 14 against 14.
Right, let's move on quickly to the ticketing thing that we mentioned last week. I talked about you finding out that SA Rugby was giving out free tickets for the Ellis Park game. And we were actually quoted on another channel by Rory Steyn, who's a friend of Megaphone, quoting you and Megaphone to talk about that tickets being given away. What's the latest on that? There seems to be a bit of a gradual awakening in the corridors of power at SA Rugby that maybe they misjudged this one.
That's so funny. The way Saru we spoke about the smoke and mirrors thing. The way Saru was playing around with this before the Ellis Park game and pretending that nothing was wrong, and then lowering the prices midweek, and then free tickets appear on the market, and still we don't know how many free tickets. Then this past week, they didn't say much, but you saw clearly there were gaps in Loftus. I think I heard somewhere, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, that there were 15,000 unsold tickets. So what's Loftus, 52, 55?
Yeah, that 45,000, that was the official count. That's what they said, what we heard, at Loftus.
Okay, so maybe the penny has finally dropped. Yesterday, Saru put out a statement that they're going to review their ticketing strategy. Listen very carefully, ticketing strategy at the end of the season. So I think the penny has dropped. They understand, and I will read some of it to you so that the viewers can understand. They still say they're not there for profit and stuff, but they're clearly trying to make some money. And I understand. So I've got to qualify this first before I know people are going to get upset and they jump down our throats. Not that it matters. We do care what the viewers think, but they need to understand where we come from. So the first thing is, I understand they need to pay the players. They need a lot of money. They need to pay the Springboks. They need to pay the Women Boks. They need to pay the Baby Boks. Without money, these teams won't be as successful. Okay, but still there can be better ways. I think if they had slashed before the game, even if they had slashed the Ellis Park tickets by half, all of them slashed by half, they would have had 50,000 paying customers. How many of those were paying customers? I know. The mere fact that they had to drop the prices, slash the prices midweek, tells me there's something wrong. Again, 10,000, like you said, unsold tickets. Slightly lower prices, they would have sold more tickets at Loftus. So I think that's the important thing. So and that in mind, this is what Saru had to say yesterday in the press release. We must balance this commitment with the responsibility of making these events financially viable. It's a delicate balancing act, but one we are determined to manage responsibly. And then later on in the statement, I mean, it's quite a long statement. Our commercial strategies are designed to cover the cost of running rugby in South Africa, and not to increase profits. Yes, you got to pay the bills, but you got to be realistic. It's supply and demand. Unfortunately, I think Saru has now realized that the demand is not as high as they think it would be. Yes, I know that the All Black games are mostly all sold out, or there's a much higher demand. But for the average man in the street, for me and you, that want to go watch a game, I can't afford 1,000 rand, let alone 3,000 rand for a ticket. So, if I want to take my wife with, that's 2,000 rand just to start. That's not my transport. That's not my food and drinks at the stadium. Even just a pie and a Coke will cost you upwards of $50. So and I think to me, the penny has dropped. So Saudi realized they need to relook at this and need to find a more balanced, as they say, a more balanced approach.
Well, I think in fairness, they're not just paying the Springboks. They also have to contribute to the unions, the franchises, the smaller rugby unions. They have to keep everybody afloat. And they make their money from sponsorships and they make their money from these tests. Then that means if people are not prepared to pay those prices, you have to drop the prices. But it obviously means your income is going to lower. Like any normal salary earner will tell you, if your income is lower, then your expenses have to go lower as well. So maybe there we have to talk about the structure of SA Rugby. Is it, can we afford all these little unions and little, small towns and everything else? And I'm not running them down. I'm just saying,
can we afford all the bodies that sit at Plattekloof?
Ooh, thanks, Jan. You left the zinger for last.
I know that you need administrators. I know that you need people. I think, and again, it's a bigger picture. I think we need to look at the bigger picture here. You have to also cover the Craven Weeks, because that's where some of our best talent comes from. These youth tournaments. So there's a whole process, and I understand all that. If you drop your prices slightly more, you'll get more people into the stadium, which means instead of getting a half full stadium and then having to give tickets away, you now will get a 3/4 full stadium or a full stadium, and you make more money than you made anyway, because you had to give half your tickets away. Mm-hmm. That's just the basic principle. I think that they will sit and review and decide next year. Okay, maybe giving it all these corporates. Maybe their fight with the Loftus suite holders also burnt them a bit, because they suddenly realized that even the suite people are not going to buy. I certainly not. Just to sit in the suite, then I'd rather go sit in the stand. I mean, I can go get my beer at the pub. If I pay R1,000, I can still have a beer before the game. I can have a beer in the stadium. I have my pie or my packet of chips and whatever, and still enjoy the game from the stand. But I'm not going to pay R6,000 or R7,000 to have some weird menu which I don't like in any event.
For the seat that you paid for the beginning of the season. You have to pay for it again.
Exactly, yeah.
But I mean, it's not that easy. It's not that simple. I mean, you have to explain that to people sometime. Yeah. It's not that simple. But yeah, there is a court case going on, so we're not going to talk about that too much. Yeah. I agree with you. The development of rugby is important, but there's limits to everything. And I wanted to ask you this little, maybe a bit more controversial question. The fact that the tickets were expensive is one thing. But is the demand still there? It seems, I just get a feeling, and I've said it to someone else before, there's a little bit of fatigue almost setting in here. Maybe, fuel is so much more expensive than it was a year ago, and groceries are more expensive and everything else. People are not that worried about rugby, whether it's Springboks or not. So Springbok versus England, maybe still Springbok versus Wales. I don't know. I'm not going to go watch that one. Yeah, All Blacks must still make a plan. I'm trying to say that I think the product might be getting a bit stale here almost. We all love Rassie, but, it's still another year. Now there's more Springboks, more money. I'm just getting the impression that it's getting a bit flat. And, I don't know what your impression is.
I think it's more that people know what's coming. So if I've got $100 to watch rugby this year, and you rightly said, am I going to spend money on Wales when I want to go watch the All Blacks? Am I going to spend money on England, who's not having a great time, in a stadium that's in an environment that's derelict and full of crime, and believe me, there's enough reports. If you want to dig a little bit more, there were problems. So do I want to spend my money on that? No, I'm going to spend my money and go watch the All Blacks. I mean, I've never watched at FNB Stadium in Soweto. It's something I would like to do one day. That's on my bucket list. Go watch a game there. And so I'm going to take my $100 and rather go watch a game in Soweto than watch a game at Ellis Park against England, who's not that great. So that's the reality of it. And again, like you said, it sounds simplistic, but it's the basic principle of supply and demand. So you've got so many games all up here in Gauteng, or there in your Gauteng. I'm in Cape Town. So you got all those games. You got 2 games at Loftus. You've got 2 tests at Ellis Park. And you've got a Transvaal game at Ellis Park. And, so suddenly you got all these games in Gauteng. And for people from outside of Gauteng to go, why not take a game to Nelspruit or to Bloemfontein? And I can guarantee you a Wales game at Nelspruit or Bloemfontein will attract a lot more people than a Wales game in Durban.
Yeah.
I must actually investigate what the demand is for tickets in Durban. But
No, I agree with your whole argument. You mentioned your 100 Rand. The point is, at the beginning of this year, you would have probably had 200 Rand to go watch matches. Now with, everything that's been happening in the world, fuel is more expensive, everything's more expensive. So your money that you have available to spend on rugby is not 200 Rand anymore, it's 100 Rand. So you are going to be more selective where you're going to be watching it. And that's what SA Rugby referred to in their press release, to say that the Iran war has had an effect that people were laughing at. But I mean, it makes sense. You used one of our friends, rugby journalists, moved down to the Cape, and at 18 Rand a litre, and suddenly it's 30 or something Rand a litre. To come back to Loftus is not that simple or that cheap anymore. It's just reality, people. Anyway, sorry, bit of a
you're
rant.
right. I know if I put diesel into what used to 500 Rand used to get me 300 kilometers. So 500 Rand used to get me 300 kilometers. Now 500 Rand gets me 150 kilometers.
Yeah.
That's the reality. So to make it simplistic, that's yes, I know it's the Iran war, but and I also laughed at it, and I also mocked them about it, because they without clarifying it, the Iran wars made living an already brittle economy. So prices fluctuate all the time, and that's a reality. 500 Rand got you 300 kilometers in your vehicle. Now suddenly 500 only gets you 150. It means you now have to, 2 weeks down the line or a week down the line, you have to put in another 500 Rand. So that's where your rugby money is going to. So suddenly you're right. The demand is less, but for reasons other than just too much rugby.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the two, I think.
I agree 100%. Okay, Jan, thank you. I have to let you go. You've got other commitments calling to you. So thank you for making time for us. As always, it's been fun. We'll see you where we get quoted on this week. So thank you.
Maybe Sarah quotes us to let us know that we no longer welcome at Plattekloof.
Again. Thanks, Jan. I appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it.